Or start. Bắt đầu thôi.
I will do is ask a question you know the answer to. For example, where do I arrive?
Guatemala.
Okay. I will stop. You say the answer. Okay. You must say the answer to every question. I say, I arrive in Guatemala. Where did I arrive?
I ride
You
in
say,
Guatemala.
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 Okay, easy. And number 3, I might ask a question you don't know the answer to. If you don't know the answer, just guess. Say any answer. But you must answer every question. Use your pause button if necessary. Okay, let's begin. Okay, here we go. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala?
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala.
Yes, I arrived in Guatemala. Where did I arrive?
I arrived in Guatemala.
Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Who arrived in Guatemala
Me.
on the Day of the Dead?
Me.
Well, me,
Ages.
AJ.
Ages.
Right? I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Did I arrive in Guatemala on November 3rd?
No.
No,
November
I
3rd.
didn't arrive in Guatemala
November 3rd.
on November 3rd. I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st.
First.
What day did I arrive in Guatemala?
On November 1st.
November 1st.
November
I
1st.
arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. Where did I arrive on November 1st?
Guatemala.
Oh, Guatemala, right? I arrived in Guatemala on November 1st. I arrived in Guatemala on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. I was curious about this holiday, so I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Was I angry about this holiday?
No, I wasn't angry.
No, I wasn't angry about this holiday. Was I sad about this holiday?
I wasn't sad about holidays.
No, I wasn't sad about this holiday.
This holidays.
I was curious about this holiday. Who was curious about this holiday?
Me. Ages.
Well, I was, AJ. I was curious about this holiday. What was I curious about?
Day of the Dead.
The holiday.
The
right?
holiday.
I was curious about the holiday. Which holiday was I curious about?
Day of the Dead.
Which holiday was
Day
I
of the
curious about? The Day of the Dead.
The Day of the Dead.
I was curious about the Day of the Dead. Was I curious about the Day of the Dead?
Yes.
Or was I curious about Christmas?
I was curious.
I was curious about
the
Day of the Dead, of course.
I was curious about the Day of the Dead.
I was curious about the Day of the Dead. So, I went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where did I go?
The cemetery. Cemetery.
To the cemetery. I went to the cemetery.
I went to the cemetery.
Did I go to the cemetery?
Yes.
Or did I go to the airport?
I went to cemetery.
Easy. I went to the cemetery. Who
Cemetery.
went to the cemetery?
Me. I just.
Well, me, right? AJ.
I
went to the cemetery.
I went to the cemetery.
Where did I go?
The cemetery.
To the cemetery. Right. I went
Cemetery.
to the
Cemetery.
cemetery. When did I go to the cemetery? Well, November 1st, the Day of the Dead.
When?
Right? I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
On the Day of the Dead, November 1st.
Why did I go to the cemetery?
Because I was curious about
to
this
see
holiday.
what was happening. I went to the cemetery to see what was happening.
To see what is happening.
Who went to the cemetery to see what was happening? Me, AJ,
I just
went to the cemetery to see what was happening. Where was the cemetery?
Guatemala.
In Guatemala. The cemetery was in Guatemala. What is the Day of the Dead?
What
A holiday. The Day of the Dead is a holiday.
Let's see. What is
When is the Day of the Dead?
on November 1st?
November 1st. The Day of the Dead was and is November 1st. So I went to the cemetery on the Day of the Dead to see what was happening. What I found was quite interesting. Was it boring?
No,
it wasn't boring.
It was boring.
Was it interesting?
Yes, it was
Yes,
interesting.
yes. It was
Interesting.
interesting. The cemetery was interesting. How did I feel
I feel interesting.
about the cemetery?
I feel interesting.
I felt it was interesting. Or I thought it was interesting. Was it boring or was it interesting?
It was interesting.
It was interesting. Of course, it was interesting. What was interesting?
Yeah, what was interesting?
The cemetery. The cemetery was interesting.
The cemetery was interesting.
When was the cemetery interesting?
On November 1st.
It was interesting on the Day of the Dead,
The day of the
November
dead.
1st.
November 1st.
Okay, the atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Was the atmosphere very sad?
No, this was
No,
wasn't
the
very
atmosphere was not sad.
bad. It's not.
The atmosphere was like a party.
It's like party.
The atmosphere was very happy. Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
Happy.
The atmosphere was happy.
Was happy.
The atmosphere was like a party.
Was like a party.
What was like a party?
The atmosphere.
The atmosphere.
The atmosphere.
The atmosphere in the cemetery
Atmosphere in the cemetery
was like a party. Where Was the atmosphere like a party?
The cemetery. The cemetery.
In the cemetery.
In cemetery.
Right? The cemetery.
The cemetery.
The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
No, at my house. In the
No,
cemetery.
no, not at my house. The
The
atmosphere
cemetery.
was like a party in the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Where were the families sitting?
Next to grave.
Around the graves.
Around.
They
around
were
the grave.
sitting around
The
the graves. Who was sitting around the graves?
The families. The families.
The families.
The families.
The families were sitting around the
The
graves.
families were sitting around the graves.
Were they sitting around the trees?
No,
No,
No, the
they
trees.
weren't sitting around the trees.
they
They were sitting around the graves.
Graves.
So, where were they sitting?
The grave.
Around
The
the
grave.
graves.
Around the grave.
Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
That's ancestor.
Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, yes. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Ancestor.
Were they sitting around the graves of their friends?
No. No, not their friends.
No, not really. They were sitting
ancestor
around the graves of their dead ancestors.
of the dead ancestor.
Who was sitting around the graves?
The families.
That's right.
Families.
Families were sitting around the graves.
The families were
Whose
sitting around the grave.
graves were they sitting around? Whose graves were they sitting around?
The dead ancestor.
Yes, their dead ancestors. Their ancestors.
Ancestor.
Their ancestors' graves. They were
Ancestor
sitting
graves.
around the graves of their dead
Graves.
ancestors.
Graves.
Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors
Yes.
or the graves of their friends?
The dead ancestor.
Ancestors, right? They were
Ancestor.
sitting around the graves of their dead
Yes, ancestor.
ancestors. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers. Okay. Who cleaned the graves? That's right, the families.
The family.
What did they add?
They added
They added
fresh flower.
fresh flowers.
Fresh flower.
Did they add food?
No,
No, no, they didn't add food.
they added fresh flower.
Did they add money?
No, they didn't
No,
add
no, they
money.
didn't add money. They added fresh
fresh
flowers. What did they clean?
They cleaned the grave.
They cleaned the graves. Whose graves did they clean?
The dead ancestor.
Their ancestors. Right?
Ancestor.
They cleaned their ancestors'
The
graves.
ancestor. Grave.
Where did they add flowers? Where? Well,
Grave.
they added flowers to the graves.
Grave.
That's right.
To
They
the
cleaned the
grave.
graves and added fresh flowers. Good. I walked through the cemetery
Walking to cemetery.
and admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Where did I walk?
Cemetery.
Through the cemetery. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the park?
No, I didn't walk.
No,
through
I
the
didn't
park.
walk through the park. I walked through the cemetery. Where did I walk? Through the cemetery. Who walked through the cemetery?
Me.
I did. AJ. I walked through the cemetery. Did I walk through the cemetery or did I walk through the park?
Cemetery.
I walked through the cemetery. That's right. And I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers. Did I admire the beauty of the trees?
No, with the J.
No. I didn't admire the beauty of the trees. Did I admire the beauty of the children? No, I didn't admire the beauty of the children. What did I admire? The flowers, right? Yeah, I admired the beauty of all the colorful flowers.
Beauty of all colorful flowers.